Brian Innes is president of the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance. Thanks so much for joining me today. And let's begin with the message that you and your group want to send to political parties and candidates as we head into summer and the eventual campaign.
What's really important for Canada's agri-food export industry, including the 90% of farmers who depend on trade, is that we have trade agreements that help us bring value back to Canada. That means seeking new opportunities where we don't have trade agreements, and it means making sure the agreements we have are implemented and respected in a way that allows us to export.
So let's talk about some of those agreements. And obviously, we've just been through the negotiation for the new North American trade agreement. We know it's been introduced here in Parliament. We expect it to also pass in Mexico. But there is, of course, that uncertainty in the United States. So how concerned are you and other farmers who export as you watch the politics of this agreement south of the border?
Well, we are concerned about the uncertainty in trade. There's a lot of uncertainty coming from the U.S. administration. We see that implementing the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement as soon as possible is a step for us to help take away some of that uncertainty. So we as an organization, including all of the farmers and food processors, want to see that agreement implemented as soon as possible because we believe that will help enable us to have a more stable relationship here in North America.
And certainly, certainly there's been a push to diversify trade to find new markets, and that includes the free trade agreement with the European Union and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Why are there still issues outstanding for farmers in being able to more effectively sell their products in those countries under those two agreements?
Well, trade agreements are really good at getting rid of tariffs. Tariffs are simple. So it takes some negotiation and it takes an agreement that's in the best interest of both countries. But once they're eliminated, that's pretty straightforward. What's more complicated are things like regulatory issues. Food is one of the most highly regulated things in the economy, and that means that when we trade food, whether it's commodities or processed food, there's a lot of regulations that come on that. And when there's differences in those regulations, that can create a trade barrier. Sometimes it's intentional, and sometimes it just exists because you have two different regulatory systems. That's the same whether we're talking about North America and Canada and US and Mexico, or whether we're talking about the European Union. So when we look at the Canada-European agreement, we had commitments in that agreement to recognize the safety of both of our meat processing systems, for example. And we're still not able to export all of the beef that was agreed to in that agreement. So it's things like that where we need to work together with our governments and our regulators to help make that trade real.
So, of course, we're having this conversation as the tension continues with China over canola and other agricultural imports from Canada. So what's your sense of what needs to happen going forward with China, given that there seems to be a bit of an impasse in terms of communication at the highest levels, and that farmers are still clearly worried about what the long-term repercussions are. What do you think the Canadian government needs to do, whether it's going to be the Trudeau government or perhaps another government after October?
Well, I think, as you say, farmers are worried because China is the number one, or will soon be, the number one food import market in the world. So to be in the agricultural industry and not be able to have stable trade with China is a real problem for our Canadian industry. Whether it's the canola sector right now or other sectors who are looking nervously at how rules can be thrown out the window in a second and their billion-dollar export industry evaporate overnight. What we need in the future from all parties, including the candidates and politicians that get elected this fall, is a commitment to have a stable relationship with China. That doesn't mean that we agree with everything that happens between our two countries, or as citizens we accept everything that happens in China. But what it means is that we focus on dialogue, we focus on achieving what's important for our country, and what's important for agri-food exporters is that we have a stable trading relationship.
So let's end on this then, where we've just kind of been talking a bit of on the high level about trade and the sector, but let's just go down to the level of the individual farmer, the individual farm, the individual food processing plant, and how these political and economic questions affect them and kind of the day-to-day decisions they need to make. What do you want to tell candidates and the political parties about kind of how that micro level is being affected by all this?
There's been a lot of pain in the agri-food sector over the last number of months. And so when we talk about farmers and food processors, when they go out to talk to their politicians, they'll be able to explain the impact of these tariffs in North America on their business, whether it's steel and aluminum and the equipment they buy, or even some of the food that they trade back and forth as they make their final food products. Farmers will be able to describe how they've seen their markets evaporate overnight, whether it's China and canola, or whether it's durum wheat into Italy, or whether it's pulses into India. They'll be able to describe the impact on their incomes. All of a sudden, you're predicting that you'll have enough income to be able to support your family, and then the next day the market changes and you can't do that in the same way that you could in the past. You're looking to have to sell land and really minimize your losses. So that's what it means to farmers and food processors and the people in their community, and we want to have a dialogue with candidates and politicians to say this takes work over time. It takes a commitment through trade agreements and upholding them to get rid of this uncertainty and to have an ability for us to send more to export markets and bring more value back to Canada.
Okay, well, we'll certainly continue to watch over the summer and into the fall as the campaign begins. Brian Innes, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.